going to be sewing a simple linen tank top. This will be my second time working with linen. Be sure to check out my previous video where I worked with linen for the first time, and I made a dress following a pattern from fabricstore.com. I'm actually going to be using that same pattern this time, but I'm just going to make the top half of the dress and not the skirt to make this top. It is an open back dress, so it had a button at the top and then it was attached at the waist, and then you gathered it in with a belt, so it's going to be looser, but I'm going to close the tank top with buttons going all the way down the back. And I thought it might be interesting to do some mismatched buttons. My mother actually recently gifted me her entire button collection, so I dumped it out and I picked out some buttons that I thought kind of fit within the same family and that would look good together. So I think that'll add some interest to the back of the tank top because it is just going to be simple, boxy, and white. Linen is certainly addicting once you get started with it. I'm really back into sewing clothes and I have quite a few more in mind that I like to make. So the first thing I do is wash my fabric if it is new. This makes it easier to work with and softens it up for wear. I use a gentle cycle and tumble dry on low heat. When it comes out of the dryer, I give it a good iron with steam. Now I already had my pattern pieces prepared for making the dress, but I will link the pattern below so you can download it if you'd like to make this yourself. I pin the fabric pieces down according to the instructions. The front piece is cut on the fold, while the back is two separate pieces. The remaining two pieces are for the collar and the armhole edge binding. These will be cut on a diagonal against the grain of the fabric. With all my pieces cut, I press them with the iron once again before working with them. I do this throughout the process to keep things neat and make it easier to work with. The first part I sew will be the back button area. I started by bringing the fabric in 3/8 of an inch and then folding it over once again 1 inch. I pressed this and sewed it together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Next, I will sew the top and side edges of the shirt together. I finish my seams by using a zigzag stitch to prevent fraying. If you have a serger, that's even better. Now I'm ready to prepare the edge binding. I folded these pieces in half and ironed them down. I then pinned the collar piece with the raw edges lined up with the collar of the shirt. I stitched this and returned to the ironing board. I folded the piece over onto itself and stitched it down to the shirt. I made sure to pay attention to the ends. These will need to be tucked in before sewing it shut so that you can get a nice clean edge. I repeated this for the armholes, except for these I sewed the binding into a loop before attaching it to the top. The last part before sewing the buttons is hemming the bottom. I ironed it 3/8 of an inch and then folded over once more about 3/4 of an inch, and I sewed this in place. Now for the buttons. I used a buttonhole foot that comes with my machine. There are quite a few tutorials on how to use a buttonhole foot or how to make one by hand. I wanted to use some mismatched buttons for the back, so I picked mostly similar sizes and laid them out with a ruler to determine how far apart they should be. I then marked this placement with chalk before creating the buttonholes. Once the buttonholes are sewn, I open them with a seam ripper. Now I'm ready to begin the tedious process of sewing on buttons by hand. And once that was finished, the top was ready to wear. This top was super simple and a lot of fun. I have several more linen projects planned, including a button-down dress and a shirt. And I'm also going to try tackling sewing my own jeans. So stay tuned if you want to catch up on all these projects.